know what's going on, so they're gonna get the expert.
I had the wrong source.
Okay.
There.
Thank you. Okay, so where are we? Supposed to be. This is November 12th. So exam number 4 today on chapters 12 through 14. And let's see, chapter 15. I can't remember if we finished chapter 14, did we? Anybody remember? If I look at it, I'll remember, I guess. So after today's exam, there's only one exam left. It's the final exam, which is comprehensive, which means it covers the whole semester of material. So we have 4 chapters left, including 15 today. So chapter 15 is on just a survey of the animal kingdom. And then the last 3 chapters, chapters 19, 20, 21 are about ecology and conservation biology, which is my favorite part of biology. That's what I'm an environmental biologist. In fact, I made the PowerPoints for the last 3 chapters. The rest of them that we've seen already were made by other instructors. So let's look at chapter 14. Because I can't remember if we finished that or not. Okay, so we talked about plants moving from water onto land and the advantages and disadvantages of that, and then the anatomy of plants. Every kind of plant species has this alternation of generations type of life cycle, where there's a diploid sporophyte generation and a haploid gametophyte generation. The sporophyte generation produces spores that grow into the gametophyte generation, which produces the gametes, the sperm and egg, which then fuse in fertilization, and that fertilized egg grows into a new sporophyte generation. And what these generations look like varies depending on whether it's a moss or a fern or a gymnosperm, like a pine tree, or if it's a flowering plant. The mosses are the only group in which the gametophyte generation is the dominant or large conspicuous plant, and the sporophyte is this little tiny thing that grows out of the top of the male gametophyte plant. But in all the others, the ferns and the gymnosperms and the flowering plants or angiosperms, the sporophyte generation is the dominant or large generation, the one that you see. And the gametophyte generation is much smaller. In the case of the gymnosperms and angiosperms, the gametophyte generation is microscopically small. It fits inside of a pollen grain or inside of the of an ovule, which is what becomes a seed later. Uh, yeah, we did finish this chapter because it's on the exam today, right? So I'm reviewing some of the stuff that's on the exam. So meristems are, this word meristem just means the tissue in the plant where it grows. Plants aren't like animals. You know, when you grow everywhere. When you were a child, most of the tissues of your body got larger. But in plants, only certain parts of the plant only grows in certain places. And those are called the meristems, which are at the tips of the stems and roots to grow in length, and just below the surface of the plant to grow in thickness or diameter. Vascular tissue is the tubes that the mosses, or the moss group is called the bryophytes. They don't have vascular tissue, but all the other groups do. Talked about each group a little bit. And a little bit about their reproduction. Gymnosperms and angiosperms both reproduce pretty much the same way. They both produce pollen and seeds, but in gymnosperms, the ovules, which become the seeds, are not surrounded by a carpel. There are no flowers. They're just on the surface of the scales of the female pine cones. Whereas in flowering plants, the seeds form inside of this carpel, where the ovary is the part of the carpel where the ovules are, which gets fertilized by sperm from the pollen that lands up here. And then the seeds are formed inside of this ovary, which later becomes a fruit. In most flowering plants, becomes some kind of fruits. There's many different forms of fruits. Fertilization in flowering plants, it's called double fertilization because the egg is fertilized, but also there are two cell nuclei in the ovule that also combine with another sperm cell to produce a triploid kind of tissue. Triploid meaning it has 3 sets of chromosomes, and that becomes the endosperm in the seed, which is nutrients for the little embryo inside of the seed to keep it alive until the seed germinates to grow into a new sporophyte generation. Talk a little bit about monocots, eudicots, basal angiosperms. These are all flowering plants. Monocots. In the monocots, there's just one of the little seed leaves, little tiny leaves in the seeds. In the eudicots, there's 2. And there are some other differences as well. Okay, so we need to move ahead to chapter 15. Animals. Oops, wrong. 15. Um, Okay. Most people are more interested in animals than in plants, so I hope this will be a little more interesting. Okay. General features of all animals. They're all multicellular. There's no such thing as a one-celled animal. That's part of the definition of an animal. It's made up of many cells. Of course, the animal kingdom is within the domain eukarya. Most animals have specialized tissues and organs. So there's two kinds of tissues that animals have that other organisms don't have is muscle tissue and nervous tissue. So animals have muscles and a nervous system. Plants don't have that. Protists, fungi, they don't have muscles or a nervous system. But there's one group of animals that don't have muscles or a nervous system, and that's the sponges. Sponges are the simplest animals of all. They don't even have true tissues. There's just a few different kinds of cells that make up a sponge, and we'll look at them a little bit in a minute. Animals are heterotrophic, which just means they ingest or they eat food. Almost all animals do this. There's one kind of animal I'm thinking of that does not ingest food, and that's a tapeworm. A tapeworm is a parasitic worm that lives inside of other organisms. Like humans get tapeworms, usually living in their intestines, but they can they can get in your brain and even live in your brain tissue. But tapeworms don't even have a digestive system because they're surrounded by, if they're living in your digestive system, they're surrounded by the nutrients that you are digesting. And so they just absorb the nutrients right through their body wall. So they're animals that don't ingest food. Animals reproduce sexually. There are a few cases of animals that reproduce asexually. Grow and develop through developmental stages with distinct body plans that we'll talk about. If you go to university and major in biology, you might take a course called developmental biology, in which I took that class, and it's just learning how animals develop from the fertilized egg all the way through adults. Animals are motile, which means they can move around on their own. Most animals are like that, not all. We'll see that sponges, again, are an example of animals that don't move around. They just attach. They're just attached to the bottom of the ocean or attached to a rock, and they just stay there for their whole life. Just a couple examples of animals being heterotrophs. A bear eating a fish, and a heartworm is a parasite. It lives inside of other animals. Okay, this word tissue, the definition of a tissue is just several similar cells. It can be more than one kind of cells, but cells that together, usually along with some non-living material, have some kind of function within an individual, within an organism. Not only animals, but plants have tissues as well, as we've seen. But they have a common embryonic origin that we'll see in a minute what those origins are in the embryo. Tissues are specialized to perform particular functions. For example, in humans, we have a bone is a type of tissue, muscle is a tissue, fat, even certain cells that contain fat are a type of tissue. We have connective tissue like tendons and ligaments that attach muscles to bones or bones to bones. Nervous tissue includes the neurons, which are the nerve cells that conduct impulses, and there's also a bunch of helper cells in the nervous system, called neuroglia cells. And epithelial tissues are tissues that are in thin layers, like your skin is epithelial. And the lining of any hollow organs is epithelial tissue. Your whole digestive tract is made up of epithelial tissue, like the wall of your stomach, the wall of your intestines are epithelial tissue. And we already know that animals like us are made up of diploid cells. Somatic just means cells that are not sperm or egg. They're not reproductive cells. All of your cells are diploid, except for the sperm and egg, which are haploid. Diploid again means 2 sets of chromosomes. Haploid means 1 set. Sexual reproduction just means involves sperm and eggs in females. The sperm are motile, which means they move, they swim, and they swim through a liquid medium to the egg. The egg, which is says sessile, which means the egg doesn't move toward the sperm generally. The sperm moves toward the egg. And this so a haploid sperm and a haploid egg come together to form a diploid fertilized egg called a zygote. The zygote has 1 set of chromosomes from the mother and 1 from the father. Fertilization can be internal or external. So in animals like us, most mammals, fertilization is internal. So that involves sexual intercourse. Word for sexual intercourse in biology is copulation. To copulate just means the male fertilizes the female internally. But in some animals, many animals, the female lays eggs, and then the male releases the sperm onto the eggs externally, outside of the female's body. That's the way most fishes do it. Depending on what kind of animal it is, some of them go through a metamorphosis, which just means a total change in the form of the body of the organism. And if there's metamorphosis, then there will be one or more larval stages. A larva is just a very young stage in the life cycle, which looks much different from the adult. For example, tadpoles and adult frogs, they look very different. They eat different kinds of foods. The tadpoles are usually algae or plants, but the adult frogs eat insects. In some animals, there is no metamorphosis. The the young hatch from eggs, or they're laid, or they are born from the mother, and they look pretty much like an adult. They just get bigger as they grow. Most mammals are like that. And there are different degrees of metamorphosis. Some metamorphosis is called incomplete metamorphosis like in some insects, in which the young immature individuals are different from the adults, but not a lot different. Like complete metamorphosis would be like a caterpillar and a butterfly. But there, in the case of some insects, the young insects, they look pretty much like the adults, but they don't have wings yet. And so as they grow, they will develop wings. So the young are different from the adults in that way, but it's not a huge difference. So that would be called incomplete metamorphosis. Asexual reproduction does occur in some animals, not very many, but it occurs in some invertebrate animals. Some worms. There's some kinds of worms. You cut a worm in half, and each half will grow into a new worm. And that would be asexual reproduction. There are some sea anemones will reproduce by budding, which means just a little bud will grow off the side of the adult, and it'll fall off and grow into a clone, a new individual, new adult. So fragmentation just means an individual just breaks apart, and each piece will grow into a new one. In some cases, in some species of animals, a female can produce offspring without males. They don't need to be fertilized by a male. That's a word for that, parthenogenesis. Just reproduction without male. It's essentially sexual reproduction because they are eggs, but they fertilize themselves. So some insects and even there are some lizards that do that. Females don't need a male for reproduction. Females or animals are classified into groups or let's say that different groups of animals have different characteristics of their body form, body plans, including type of symmetry. Symmetry just means the sameness. So, for example, humans have a type of symmetry in which the left half of you looks pretty much like the right half. Like if you cut you in half, the two halves look pretty much the same, except they're mirror images of each other. So that's a type of symmetry. The number of tissue layers formed during embryonic development. So very early in an embryo, you start out as just a hollow ball of cells, and then that hollow ball can either form into 2 layers or 3 layers of cells. That those layers of cells later lead to the various tissues. Like one layer might become the digestive system, another layer would become the skin and the nervous system. See, we'll talk more about that in a minute. The presence or absence of an internal body cavity. The body cavity means something like what we have, this whole abdominal cavity, where your stomach and small intestines and large intestines and spleen and liver, they're all within that cavity in your body. That's what kind of cavity this is about. Some animals have that and some don't. Another feature is protostome versus deuterostome type of articulation. We'll see what that means in a minute. Okay, here's a phylogenetic tree of all the animals. Based on morphological, which is just the morphology just means the form of an organism. Fossil evidence and genetic evidence of comparing the DNA, comparing the genes of different groups of animals to see how similar and different they are, which suggests how closely related they are. So sponges, these are the most primitive, simple animals. And you see that go all the way back to the common ancestor of all animals. This word metazoa just means animals, essentially. But so the sponges are a group all by themselves, separate from all the other animals. These are the most primitive, simple animals, and they don't even have tissues. Just a few kinds of cells make up a sponge. And then it's cnidarians and comb jelly. So these are like jellyfishes, sea anemones, chordates. That's us. These are the vertebrates, animals with backbones. Mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. And the echinoderms, the starfishes, sea cucumbers, sand dollars are in this group. So we're more closely related to starfishes than we are to other groups like mollusks. That's the clams and snails and octopus, squid, nautilus. The annelids, this is a group of worms called segmented worms. This includes earthworms and leeches. They're called segmented. If you ever look closely at an earthworm that has rings, or a night crawler that has rings around it, those are the segments. Same with a leech. It has these ridges or rings around it. Each one of those rings is a segment of the body, and they're just repeated, the same kind of body segments repeated all along the animal with the same organs in each segment. Ribbon worms, this is a small group of mostly marine, mostly ocean worms that most people never go their whole life without ever seeing them. Rotifers, this is your little tiny, almost microscopic animals that live in fresh water or oceans. And they're called rotifers because they have two little rotating wheels on their heads with cilia on them that they use that for swimming and also for sweeping food into their mouths. Flatworms, so this includes planaria, which you may have seen. There's these little free-living flatworms. They have a head kind of shaped like an arrowhead, and you have these two eye spots, and little tiny things. Might be a big one would be half an inch long, but they live in fresh water. If we go to any lake and or a pond and take a water sample, you might find some of these. They just swim through the water. This also includes the tapeworms and some other parasitic worms. Now, roundworms, nematode worms. Some of these are parasitic, like the worms that dogs get, and humans also get those parasitic roundworms sometimes. But most of them are free living in the environment, and this group nematodes are many different kinds of them. This might be the largest group of animals. There's so many different kinds, we have no idea. They just live everywhere. You have them living on you right now, probably. There are roundworms that adapted to just about every environment. People have roundworms living in their eyebrows. They don't even know it. And arthropods. This is, as far as we know, the largest group. This includes the insects, the crustaceans, like lobsters and crayfishes, and also the I think that's words. Centipedes and millipedes, and spiders, scorpions, horseshoe crabs. They're all in that group. So this shows that how these different groups are related to each other. And along here, we haven't described a lot of what these terms mean. What's that? You read that word. But there's specialized tissues. So all these have specialized tissues, but the sponges don't. Radiata, radial symmetry, we haven't said what that means yet, but essentially it means that they're round. Like a jellyfish is a round animal. And unlike us, which have a left and right half. So that's what bilateria means. Left and right, bilateral symmetry. Protostome, deuterostome, we haven't said what that means yet, but we'll see in a minute. And these Lophotrochozoa and Ecdysozoa, this is a kind of larval stage that all of these groups have. It's just a little tiny larva that is aquatic, lives in water for a while, and then it settles down and grows into the adult. This Ecdysozoa, ecdysis means molting or shedding the skin or the body covering, and that's what the roundworms and the arthropods, they have to shed the molt to grow, so that because they have a type of body covering that won't stretch, won't grow. So as an insect grows, it has to molt, or else it won't fit in its own skin. So it has to molt several times as they grow. Okay, body symmetry or sameness. Asymmetry, the prefix a on it means not or without. So asymmetry means there's no symmetry. There's just a random, irregular body shape. And that's what the sponges are. Some sponges are kind of round, barrel-shaped or cylinder-shaped, but generally sponges don't have any special predictable form. They can just look like a blob. So asymmetry. Radiosymmetry means round, like a wheel. So the cnidarians, sea anemones have this, and even the starfishes. Starfish it has a type of symmetry so it's kind of the same in all 5 directions from this central axis, but it's not true radial symmetry. True radial symmetry is like this. It's the same from a central axis. It's exactly the same in all directions. This is sometimes referred to as penta-radial symmetry. So penta means 5. So there's a central axis and it's kind of the same in 5 directions, but it's not true radial symmetry. And bilateral symmetry, that's what most animals like us have. There's left and right halves that are mirror images of each other. And most animals with bilateral symmetry also have a head end and a tail end. Okay, so here's showing examples of a sponge asymmetry, but the sea anemone is radial symmetry. So just a line going down through the center of this animal. It's the same in all directions out from that imaginary line. And then bilateral symmetry, left and right halves. Bi means 2, lateral means side. Okay, these layers of tissues in an embryo, these are called germ layers. The word germ in biology, in some cases, means that some kind of pathogen, a disease-causing microorganism. But the word germ also refers to reproductive cells. And that's how the word is used in this case. These germ layers are the in a very early embryo, the germ layers are just these layers of cells that later develop into the different tissues in the adult. Some animals have only 2 germ layers in the embryo. Others have 3. Most of them have 3. And the inner layer is called the endoderm, the outer layer is called the ectoderm, and if there's a third one, it'll be in between the endoderm and ectoderm, and that's called the mesoderm. So most animals have 3 layers. So here's would be a very early embryo. This doesn't even look like an animal. It's just a hollow ball of cells. And so if it has just endoderm on the inside, ectoderm on the outside, but some animals have a third one in between. For example, humans are like this. You started out as a ball of cells like this, and the ectoderm, the outer layer, that becomes your skin, and also your nervous system forms from your brain and spinal cord form from this outer layer. The endoderm, this will become the wall of your throat and stomach and small intestine and large intestine. So this hole is where the food passes through you. The mouth at one end and the penis at the other end. And in between, the mesoderm will become your muscles, skeletal muscles, and some other organs. This word coelom, that's the body cavity that was mentioned earlier, that most animals have. So a fluid-filled body cavity lined with mesoderm tissue. So that in animals like us, that's where many of our internal organs are, in that coelom. Some animals don't have that. So like flatworms have no coelom. They have no body cavity. Their body is just solid tissues. And the pseudocoelomates. Pseudo means false. So they have a body cavity, but it's not considered to be a true coelom because in a true coelom, the body cavity is surrounded by mesoderm. But in a coelomate, it's lined partially by mesoderm. So partially by mesoderm and partly by endoderm. So it's a body cavity, but it's not considered a true coelom, so it's called a pseudocoelom. And that's what the roundworms, the nematode worms, have. So acoelomate, it's all just solid. Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. But in a true coelomate, with a true coelom, there's a body cavity here that's completely surrounded by mesoderm in the embryo. But in a pseudocoelomate, there's a body cavity here, but it has mesoderm on the outside, endoderm on the inside. So that's considered a pseudocoelom. It's a body cavity, but it's not a true coelom. Okay. When this hollow ball of cells that is the very early embryo is developing into an animal, it forms this pouch. So just think of it like a balloon, an inflated balloon, and if you poke your finger into that balloon, that's what happens here. It's this infolding. So it starts out as just a hollow ball of one layer of cells, and then as it forms this pouch by these cells fold in. Now this is how we get two layers. So this will become the endoderm, and this will become the ectoderm, and then the mesoderm forms in between. And if there's a coelom, the coelom will be this hollow space surrounded by a mesoderm. But we know that in some animals, this pouch eventually goes through all the way to the other side, and so it makes a continuous like a tunnel all the way through. But in some animals, though, this will become the mouth. So the first opening that forms is the mouth, but then later, when this connects all the way to the other end, that will form the anus. But in other animals, this will become the anus, and this end will become the mouth. And so protostome means stomach first, and deuterostome means stomach second, or mouth second, mouth, stomach. And so most animals are protostomes. The mouth forms first, and then the anus forms at the other end. But the animals where the anus forms first and then the mouth at the other end, there's only two groups. That's the chordates, like us, the vertebrate animals, and also the echinoderms, the starfishes. So going back to this evolutionary tree, we see this the deuterostome group, deuterostomia. That means the anus forms first, the mouth forms second, and that's the chordates and the echinoderms. So the animals like us, vertebrate animals, and the starfish group. They're the only ones that have that deuterostome development. All the other animals, this first opening that forms becomes the mouth and the anus at the other end. that difference is considered important enough to be a basis for grouping animals the way they are on that evolutionary tree. Okay, let's look at some of these important groups of animals. There's about 35, 35, remember we learned kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. There's about 35 phyla in the animal kingdom, 35 groups of animals at that phylum level. And we're not going to look at all of them. Some of them are they're small groups, and they're just groups of like some weird worms that live only in the bottom of the ocean and nobody ever sees them, so they're not terribly important. But we'll look at some of the bigger, more important groups. So sponges, the simplest, most primitive group of animals, the phylum Porifera, because they have a bunch of little pores or holes through them that the water circulates through. But this is not an unimportant group. There are more than 10,000 species of sponges. And there are some freshwater sponges. Most of them are marine, live in the ocean, but there are some freshwater ones. And I've only seen a couple of them in my life. And I spent 3 summers doing aquatic freshwater biology research on Lake Erie, living on an island, and I was looking for stuff like this almost every day, and I only found 2 of them in all that time. And it just looked like a tiny little, like a half-inch diameter patch on a rock. Most people wouldn't even notice it. But they were freshwater sponges. So again, they're sessile, which means they are attached. They spend their whole life attached to a rock, except for a larval stage. They float or drift around in the water as a little tiny larva, and then that settles down and grows into an adult sponge. And they're filter feeders, so they pump water through them, and they filter particles of anything edible out of the water. So there are a lot of different shapes and colors of sponges. Here's just one type, but the general body form of a sponge it's usually got some kind of hollow chamber inside. And there are there's only a few different kinds of cells here that make up the whole sponge. There are these cells that line the inside, and they have little flagella projecting into the hollow space, and these flagella are moving, and they make a current of water. They draws water through these holes, and then out through like a chimney at the top, and they filter particles of food out of the water that's flowing through. There are other cells that will take those nutrients and share the nutrients with the other cells, and there might be another type of cell that makes up the outer layer. But there's only those few types of cells that make it up, and there's also some non-living material in here, depending on which type of sponge it is. Some sponges have a protein called spongin, and so if you buy a sponge, you can buy natural sponges just for washing your car and stuff. That's actually a dead sponge. All the cells have been dissolved away from that, but what's left is just that protein skeleton of the sponge, and that's what you use to wash your car with. Other sponges have little tiny, they're called spicules. They're like little tiny hard needles and star-shaped bits that make up a hard skeleton particles that are made up of either calcium carbonate or silica, which is like glass. That add structure to the sponge. Okay, cnidarians. These are the jellyfishes, sea anemones, hydroids, and corals. Hydroids are, I don't think we have a picture of, well, they're a hydroid. Well, I can come back to that in a minute. Let's talk about what these are generally. This group called cnidarians, named after the stinging cells that they have called cnidocytes. So everyone knows that there are some jellyfishes that can hurt you. They have tentacles that hang down in the water, and these tentacles have stinging cells that are little tiny cells that will actually shoot out little harpoons if you touch those stinging cells. And that's how they catch food that way. But they can also work in defense. So these are pretty simple, just two tissue layers, an epidermis and a gastrodermis that lines the digestive cavity. And there's one opening that acts as both the mouth and the anus. So they take food in, digest it, and then poop out the rest through that same hole. They have a very simple nervous system called a nerve net. And they have muscles. If you've ever seen a jellyfish swim, they contract and to pump water out, to push themselves through the water. Well, here's showing the stinging cells called nematocysts. They're touch sensitive. Anything touches them and they automatically discharge. Some of them have toxins that can hurt you, can hurt people. These cnidarians come in two body forms. The jellyfish form is called a medusa. So it's like an upside down bowl with the tentacles hanging down, and the opening to the gastrovascular cavity where food comes in is on the bottom. But there's the other form is called a polyp, like a sea anemone. This is like an upside down medusa that's attached to some surface, and it has the tentacles at the top. And the opening, the mouth, this is the mouth and the anus both. It's at the top, and the tentacles bring food in. So some cnidarians spend their whole life like this, like a sea anemone. It's polyp form its whole life. Some of them spend almost their whole life like this. But some of them, many jellyfishes, they start out as a polyp, which is like a larval stage of the jellyfish. They'll live this way for a while, attached, and then after a while they'll disconnect from the surface they're attached to, turn upside down, and turn into a jellyfish. It's a form of metamorphosis. There's previous slide said that one group of these is hydroids. Hydroid is, well, an example of a hydroid. It's just like a tiny, like a sea anemone has got all these tentacles like radiating out right from the base. But a hydra hydroids are smaller. It's like a stalk, and just a few tentacles sticking out the top. And there's this is called a hydra, this animal. And these live in fresh water around here everywhere. If you take a water sample from a water lake, look under a microscope, you'll probably find some of these little hydras. So that's a polyp type of Nigerian, spends its whole life like this. They're very cool to watch. They have these tentacles that waving around. They're filter feeding particles and then stuffing them into their mouth up here. But if you disturb them, they'll draw the tentacles in. It'll roll up or just scrunch up into a ball, and they can release and swim with their tentacles. They swim around and land somewhere. Really cool to watch. And they're tiny. Maybe a big one would be an inch long or an inch tall. So there's a sea anemone. Corals are also in this group. Corals they live in colonies. So the hard rock part of a coral is actually calcium carbonate structure that is produced by all the many little coral animals together. They build this structure that they all live in. And so if you look at a live coral, it looks like some kind of weird shaped piece of rock. But if you look closely in our microscope, you see it has all these little holes in it, and each one of them will have a little coral animal sticking out with its tentacles sticking out, just like a hydra, filter feeding. But if they're disturbed at all, they'll suck back in and disappear. So to study them, you have to be patient, because just a shadow of your hand over a coral will scare them, and they'll suck back in and disappear for a while until they feel safe again, and then they'll stick their tentacles out. There's a jellyfish. Some of these jellyfish is like a Portuguese man-o'-war. That's a big jellyfish, floats in the ocean, and it has these long tentacles hanging down, and it can hurt you if you brush against it and get stung by it. But that's actually not one animal. That's a whole colony of the Portuguese man-o'-war. It's a whole colony of cnidarians, and there's one of them that's specialized that has this big air-filled bladder, and that's what floats. But along with this one, there will be a whole bunch of other ones that have their tentacles hanging down. So this is a colony of a whole bunch of animals all together that is called the man-o'-war. Okay, next group, this is more than one group, but flatworms, nematodes, and arthropods. So these all have bilateral symmetry, and cephalization just means it has a head end and a tail end. Many animals that have this cephalization, they have a head at one end, and that's where most of the specialized senses are. If they have eyes, they'll be in the head. If they have a sense of smell, that'll be at the head end. And usually if they have a mouth, not always, but in most cases, the mouth will be at the head end of the animal. And so that way they have their senses in front, so they're moving in the direction that their senses are can detect what's in front of them. Okay, the flatworms, called the phylum Platyhelminth. Platy means flat, helminth means worm. So most of these are parasites on animals, other animals, but there are some that are free living in the environment. They usually live in water or moist places at least. Incomplete digestive tract means they just like the cnidarians, like the jellyfishes and sea anemones. There's just one opening that serves as both the mouth and the anus. So food comes in and food goes out through the same opening. It's not a continuous tube like in humans with a mouth at one end and anus at the other end. Simple nervous system, just like a ladder-like arrangement of nerve cells. Central ganglia in the head, so it doesn't have a true brain, but there's just a lot of nerve cells in the head of the animal. They call that a central ganglia. There's a feature called flame cells that serve as excretory organs. Excretion means getting rid of waste products. And these flame cells, it's just a little hollow chamber with a cell that has a little flagellum that moves back and forth that pumps water into that cell. It's like a very simple, primitive form of kidneys. Called flame cells. It looks, that little flagellum that's moving inside there, it looks kind of like a flickering flame of a candle. It's called flame cells. So most are monoecious or hermaphroditic. Both of those words mean just each individual is both male and female. That's both male and female reproductive parts. Again, acoelomate body plan, so no body cavity. So here's a planarian flatworm, a free-living, non-parasitic flatworm. If you were taking if we were having a regular lab with this class like we normally would if we didn't have COVID, you would be, I'm sure Ms. Curtis would have some planarians, live planarians in lab for you to look at. So these things, they just glide through water. They're cool to watch. There's something weird about these guys. If you cut them up in pieces, each piece will grow into a new worm. And if you take a sharp scalpel or a razor and cut its head in half like this, each half will grow into a complete head, and you'll have a two-headed planarian. And there have been experiments done with these, training these, they can learn, train them to respond to certain stimuli in a certain way. And then weird scientists would cut it, after they train it, they would cut it up and then into pieces, and then let each piece grow into a new adult, and each piece would retain that knowledge, that training that they did to it. It's weird. Flatworms. These are different kinds of flatworms. So diversity just means different variety of types. So these are mostly this one is a planarian. Just free living, not parasitic, but this is a tapeworm. These can be many feet long and live inside of people. Tapeworms, and these are flukes or parasitic flatworms, different kinds. But these tapeworms have the head end has hooks on it that will attach to, for example, attach to the wall of your small intestine, and then the rest of the worm will just trail behind it along through your small intestines, absorbing nutrients. And they'll have segments. Each segment has reproductive organs and can produce eggs. And the segments break off and come out and poop, and then grow into, and then new tapeworms grow. So there could be tapeworms on the ground, and then some grazing animal swallows that, and now that animal has tapeworms. Okay, the nematodes, the roundworms. This is a group I said there's just so many different kinds of these. This group hasn't been studied very much. They're everywhere. There's just millions of different kinds. Nobody knows how many. But they're just these inconspicuous little worms, so you have to be looking for them to even notice them. But pseudocoelomate, so that's the one that has a false coelom. It has a body cavity, but it's mesoderm toward the outside, endoderm toward the inside. Separate male and female sexes, they reproduce sexually. They have a complete digestive system with a mouth at the front end, at the head end, and a penis at the other end. Some of these are parasitic. Most of them are just free living in the environment. They just tend to specialize and live in, some of them live only in wool carpet in houses and don't live anywhere else. So some will be specialized to live only in the burrows of certain type of mouse or something. They just specialize for many different kinds of conditions. Okay, arthropods. Talk about arthropods and then I guess better quit. But, the phylum Arthropoda. Arthro means joint, as in arthritis is inflammation of the joints. So arthropods, these have joints. They have, pod means leg or foot, so these have jointed legs. Arthropods are, they have jointed legs. So they also all have an exoskeleton. The skeletons, they don't have bones inside like we do. We have an endoskeleton. Their skeleton is on the outside of the animal in the form of a hard shell or covering of the body, and it's made of this chemical, this molecule, the polysaccharide called chitin. It's the same stuff that the cell walls of fungus cells are made out of, chitin also. Chitin doesn't stretch or grow, so the insects have to molt. They have to shed that shell to grow. Some insects will do that several times in their lifetime and just grow some every time. And usually right after the insect molts, it's very vulnerable to, because it doesn't have a protective shell until the new one hardens. So it's a very dangerous time in their life because they don't have any protection until it hardens. And they will often pump themselves up. So if you're an insect, your shell has gotten, you've grown, so your shell is getting tight. You need to crawl out of it, molt, so you can grow. The insect will usually puff itself up with either with air or take in a lot of liquid to make itself big, so that as this new shell hardens, it'll be big enough to grow, that it can grow into it for a while before it has to molt again. This is considered the most successful of all animal groups. 85% of all known animal species. So we think of mammals like us being the most important animals because they're big and conspicuous, but insects, there's way more of them and way more different kinds of them, different species, and they can survive in many different kinds of environments. They have an open circulatory system, which means they have a heart that pumps. It's not through blood, like their blood is not the same as the same kind of liquid as we have, but serves the same purpose. It's transporting oxygen and nutrients throughout the body. But instead of their blood being in blood vessels, arteries and veins all the time, like in us, their blood is sucked into the heart and pumped out, and then the blood just kind of sloshes through in the animal instead of staying within blood vessels everywhere. Some of them are aquatic and they have gills for taking in oxygen out of the water. Others, but others are that live in air, like us, live on land. They don't have lungs like we do. They don't inhale and exhale like we do. They have just most of them just. Some of them have what are called book lungs, which are just like pages of paper in a book that are a lot of surface area for absorbing oxygen from the air. Others, like spiders, have those book lungs. Insects have a system of tubes that are called trachea. What is that? Like, here's an insect. There's these openings on the side of the body wall called spiracles, and each opening leads to a tube called a trachea. That's the same word we use for the airway that we breathe through, trachea. But just the movements of the insect just squeezes air out and draws air in to these tubes, and the oxygen is just used, and more oxygen is drawn in. So they don't inhale through their mouth or nose. This is where the oxygen comes in. If you look at a grasshopper or something, you'll see a line of little holes along the side. That's where it breathes. Okay, 5 subphyla within the phylum Arthropoda. So the trilobites, these are extinct. They're only fossils. Some people who like to hunt for fossils, if they find a trilobite, that's a great find. They're pretty cool looking. This is a trilobite here, trilobite fossil. Hexapoda, that's the insects. Hex means 6. Insects have 6 legs, 3 pairs, so it's called hexapoda. Myriapoda, myriad means a lot of something. So myriapoda, these are centipedes and millipedes, have a lot of legs. So it's kind of like a stressed out insect with a whole lot of pairs of legs instead of just 6, just 3 pairs of legs. Crustaceans, crabs, shrimp, barnacles, lobsters, crayfishes, isopods. Isopods are the little roly-poly things that you lift up a rock and there's always some of them under it. Those are crustaceans. And then the Cheliceraida, that includes the horseshoe crabs and the arachnids. The arachnids are spiders, ticks, mites, and actually this scorpions should be within parentheses here. So scorpions are arachnids. Daddy longlegs are also arachnids, but they're not spiders. It's a separate group of arachnids. Okay, so that's a spider, body form of a spider. Spider has just 2 body segments, called the cephalothorax, like the head and the thorax. If this were an insect, it would have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. But in a spider, the head and thorax are combined into one segment called the cephalothorax. Spiders have 4 pairs of legs and also another little pair of like mini legs called pedipalps that they use for handling food and stuff. There's the book lungs, thin sheets of tissue that absorb oxygen from the air. These would be the spinnerets, where the spider produces silk for making webs. This is the underside of a horseshoe crab. It's similar to the book lungs in a spider for taking oxygen out of the air. These guys live in water, so they absorb oxygen out of the water through the gills that are in it's again like little thin sheets of tissue that absorb oxygen. There's an insect. Insects have 3 pairs of legs. Most insects that have wings have 2 pairs. One group of insects that has only 1 pair of wings is the flies. The flies and also mosquitoes are in the same group. They have just 1 pair of wings. The wings and the legs are attached on this middle segment, the thorax, and the abdomen is this, the third body segment. Again, they have, like all arthropods, they have jointed legs. Most insects have antennae. Spiders don't have antennae like that. Insects are a huge group. There's millions of species. Probably the most successful group of animals on Earth is insects. Centipedes. Centipede means 100 legs. They don't have that many. Different species have different numbers of legs, but it's most of them. It's about 30 something legs. It varies. But this is a house centipede, kind that often get into houses. You might see one on your wall. They used to live in a place. They come up from the crawl space behind the trim on the floor and crawl up the walls at night, and it freaked me out. I see this big dark spot on the wall, and there'd be a big centipede like that, where they'd run across the floor. These have a venomous bite. The front legs are modified into fangs, venomous fangs. And, they're not big enough to bite a human and hurt you, but that's how they get their prey. They eat insects and worms and stuff. But there are big ones. Some of them get to be a foot long or so in the tropics, and they can hurt a person. They can sting you and do a lot of damage. Used to happen to soldiers in World War II in places like the Philippines. They'd be in a foxhole, and there'd be a giant centipede would bite them on the leg or the crotch or something. And they'd be in a medical emergency situation. That can be extremely painful. Millipedes are perfectly harmless. They just eat plants and dead stuff. They don't have any fangs. The centipedes, the legs stick out to the sides. The millipedes, the legs are underneath. Centipedes have 1 pair of legs per body segment. These have 2 pairs of little legs per body segment. Some of these get pretty big. I've seen them in the Carolinas. Some big, like 1/2 inch diameter. Pretty cool. Crayfish. This is a crustacean. The crayfishes and lobsters have 10 legs, 5 pairs of legs. They're called decapods. Deca means 10. So that includes the shrimps, crabs, crayfishes, lobsters. There's even a lot of plankton, little tiny plankton. Plankton are just little animals that or plants that drift around in the water. Some of them are crustaceans. These are arachnids. So scorpion is an arachnid, and spiders are arachnids. We've got 4,000 species of spiders. They're all venomous. Used to be thought, just a few years ago, there were some spiders discovered that It was thought before that that all animals, that all spiders are predators. They all eat insects or other small animals. But they're just within the last 10, 15 years, there have been some spiders discovered that only eat plants. That was a new discovery. But almost all spiders are venomous. Most spider venom doesn't hurt humans. If he gets bitten by a wolf spider around here, it might feel like a mosquito bite or something. But there are some, of course, that can hurt humans. Black widows and the brown recluse, and another one called a hobo spider. They all produce silk, which is a protein, a spider silk or webs. Some of them spin webs to catch insects, or they live in their webs. Others, like this one, this spiders like this, they don't build webs and stay in a web. This is a hunting, wandering spider. They just wander around and they pounce on the insects and kill them and eat them. But they still make silk. These wolf spiders and jumping spiders. Jumping spiders are the little tiny, short-legged, hairy ones that that if they're scared, they jump. But the spiders like that don't build a web, you might not notice it, but as they're walking along a surface like this, they'll be making a trail of spider silk behind them. They can just stick it down an inch or two. And then, so if they get scared and have to jump off the edge, or a wind blows them off or something, they're attached by that string of silk behind them. They can lower themselves down or crawl back up. Okay, I guess we should stop. Yeah, we should stop here. We'll finish this next week. So we got to take this exam. And I said something last week about doing a take-home exam for chapters 7 and 8, because we didn't cover them on an exam. Yeah. So that I was going to put that on Moodle, but I ended up making paper copies of it. So you can take this with you, do this. It's only 30 questions. Should be easy to look up the answers. Some of these are some genetics problems that you have to figure out the answers. I don't think they're really hard genetics problems. So just turn this in next week. So I hope this will help everybody's average. You should do well on this. So everybody gets one of these, and so let's take a break if you want to, and then we'll do the exam. What do you want to? We ready? Get on with it.
Everybody have a pencil? Anybody need to borrow a pencil? Need to borrow one? I'll type it off. I'm also. This was an art classroom. There must be pencils laying around somewhere.
Do you miss much?
I think we do it again. Oh, sorry.